Set in April 1944, the events in Plan of Attack take place as Britain and the Allies prepare for D-Day and what would be the greatest seaborne invasion in history, and an event that would bring about the end of the war.
Well, April 1944, of course, everybody in Britain, indeed throughout the free world, was waiting for D-Day, the liberation of northwest Europe. The island was, it said, only kept afloat by the barrage balloons that were up in the sky because there were so many men from not only the British Army, the Canadian, the American forces, the other free allies, and everybody, there was a great sense of anticipation. The RAF Bomber Command under Air Marshal Harris had promised sort of the British War Cabinet that they could eliminate Germany from the war by bombing German cities. And this had, of course, in fact proved to be a failure. And Bomber Command's efforts, much against Harris's own wishes, were diverted into the bombing of communications behind the lines in France and the rest of northwest Europe. And that was absolutely vital for the success of D-Day.
It's absolutely true, but this is the first time we've actually had a whole story inspired by one man's experience in the war. And of course, we couldn't have written this story 2 years ago because it wasn't even known that Hughenden Manor, which this is all based on, actually did exist. And there was this top-secret map-making operation. It's incredible to be sitting in this room now, surrounded by it. You know, one of the more recent stories from the war. It was a wonderful opportunity to actually talk to somebody who had done the work. And in fact, the guy who gets killed in this episode, his backstory, not the character, but the backstory of the person who's killed, is very much based on Victor, who gave us so much information about his time working at Hughenden.
Victor Gregory was 19 and living in London, where he was an apprentice lithographic map and plan draftsman. After being called up, he did 6 weeks basic RAF training before he received his posting.
When I arrived there, you know, it was a strange business. I didn't know where I was going. No one knew where they were going when they went to Hughenden Manor. You had a telephone number to ring when you got to High Wycombe Station. And you rang this telephone number. It was really lucky dip. And a voice said that transport would be sent for you. Wait outside the station. So I waited outside the station, as everyone else did, with their kit bag and all the rest of the belongings. And one of the station wagons came down and said, you know, are you Vic Gregory? And I said, yes. And he said, hop aboard, I'll take you up. Where am I going? Oh, you'll know when you get there, sort of thing. It was a very, very secret organisation.
Hughenden Manor is now owned by the National Trust, but for the duration of the war, it was transformed into Operation Hillside, a map-making facility providing Bomber Command with maps for their raids over northern Europe.
This is where the bulk of our work gets done. We only have old maps of Germany. Hitler made sure that none left the country after 1933, so we have to adapt them, using local intelligence, aerial photographs, anything we can get, really. This is the stereoscope. Take a look if you like. We have 2 photographs taken at 2 different angles, and the result is a 3-dimensional effect that allows us to judge height, distance, that sort of thing.
Alan Williams is head of the Aerial Reconnaissance Archive at Keele University, and he worked closely with the art department. During the war, it is estimated that between 80 and 100 million aerial photographs were taken of northern Europe. 10 million of these pictures survived and are held in the archive, and they provide a unique and significant piece of British and European history.
If you look at the photographs that surround us, you'll see that there's typically a 60% overlap between the 2 photographs. So as the aeroplane flew, it would take a photograph, and then maybe a second or 2 later it would take a second photograph. And because there's an overlap, the photographs show the same location from a slightly different angle. So when you view those 2 images through a stereoscope, that gives you this 3rd dimension. And the first time that you actually look through a stereoscope, it's quite shocking. I was amazed the first time I looked through a stereoscope, and you have this sort of childish excitement when you see the world in 3D below you. And looking at the Second World War in 3D, which is something that we're privileged to do all the time, is a unique way of looking at history.
There was a lot of emphasis placed on getting our maps really accurate. Let's face it, A lot of people, certainly the crews, depended on it, and I think the staff at Ewington soon realised that there was no second best. We really got it right. And if it wasn't right, and we had a check-in section, which I became a member of, generally speaking, the people that joined the check-in section, there was about 6 or 7 of us, were the most experienced people they had at Ewington. People who'd worked in other sections had a very wide knowledge of the work. And although it didn't always go down well, to go down to very often people who were almost twice your age, because we had a wide range of people. We had civilians. The civilians never liked the RAF telling them that they'd got it wrong. But I think we always emphasised to people, well, you know, come on, let's get it right. And if it's wrong, let's alter it and get it right, so at least there's no comeback.
If Britain and her allies were to secure victory, the RAF and its bombing raids would prove to be a crucial factor in any success. Occasionally, significant pieces of information would be found by accident.
The WAFs were looking at these photographs, and they saw 2 of the labourers having a wee up against the wall. And it caused a lot of merriment. I mean, I'm telling you this because the story is enlarged from that point. It caused merriment. Oh, come and have a look at this. And then, of course, groups of people came down to see. And then somebody said, but hang on a minute, well, what's this over here? Probably would never have been seen in the first place, had it not been the merriment that was going on round the table. And we then noticed that there was one of these partially built flying bombs, which was down the side of the ramp. And somebody said, I think I know what this is. These are ramps that they're going to fire off these doodlebugs, flying bombs. It was the V1s. And there was something like about 130, 140 of these ramps right up the coast of France and the Low Countries. We left them until they got them almost complete. We kept overflying these ramps. And then suddenly Arthur Harris decided we couldn't leave them any longer, and massive raids were made, and we blew all these ramps to pieces. I look around here and it's fantastic, really. In fact, it's a queer feeling coming in here. You know, am I believing it or not? It's going back in time. It's 60 years. You've done a fantastic job here, really.
The research for Foyle's War always starts by reading about 4 or 5 books on any given subject. So if, for example, this week it's obviously maps and the map making thing, well, there aren't any books about that, so this time we actually had to go and talk to someone who did it. And it is fortunate that we can still meet people and talk to people who were there in the war and who can give us their experience. We've had a lot of help from the Imperial War Museum, who are very good at correcting my scripts and taking out all the anachronisms that sneak in. And a lot of it is also in some strange way symbiotic. It's a very odd thing, because I was born much too late for the Second World War. But even so, when I'm writing about it, I sort of get a feeling, almost an inherited sort of knowledge that comes with it. You know, I always say that if you listen to the sound of a Spitfire taking off, you feel the same well of pride that they must have felt back in the 40s, you know, when they were in use. And it's something which somehow travels across time in a way I can't really explain.
The scripts come to me, and basically I go through them for, first of all, most importantly, for historical accuracy, and then secondly, to try and make sure that they are very much rooted in the Second World War period, as regards speech, mannerisms, manners, because, I mean, it's truism, but it is an entirely different world that we live in now from that of the Second World War. One thing, for example, that I've constantly had to emphasise is that people were much more deferential. So Anthony's had to sprinkle a lot more sirs when Milner's been talking to Foyle than were originally in the script.
Morning, sir.
Morning. How is she?
Just been to the doctor, sir. All's well.
Good.
As you'll see, Sam does have a sort of happy ending to this series. I made a decision when suddenly we were looking at the end of Foyle's War, but I wouldn't kill any major character because that seemed just sort of cheap and unfair after travelling with him for so long. I didn't want to do that, but nor did I want to have any particularly pat happy endings. It's a curious thing, but 1945, as far as I can tell, was not a time of complete celebration. I mean, you know, there are experts who will know more about this than I do, but I get the sense there was so much uncertainty, and of course rationing was going to go on for a great deal of time, and it was a very slow return to normality for everybody. So I didn't want to have, you know, everybody getting married and this is all, we all live happily ever after. I don't think it was like that.
This was a real total war, that every single person of that 48 million population in some way or other was affected by the war, because for the first time you have the conscription of civilians into the war industries and women taking their part in sort of the munitions factories, the aircraft factories on the home front. But everybody was rationed, everybody had identity cards, people also were under the threat of invasion, 1940-41, and then the reality of German bombing, and then later in the war, the flying bomb, the V-1 and V-2 rocket attacks, and especially in southern England. So, I mean, it was a total war, and I think because of that, there is that fascination. And we find this with the Imperial War Museum as well, that I think it is the Second World War galleries that have the greater appeal, because they almost have, it's not just Dad coming in to look at the ironmongery and hardware of war, it's Mum coming in to look at the rations as well. And I think that does have a terrific appeal, and how many people watching Foyle must say, oh, your grandmother's house looked like that, or she had a stove, or things, small things like that. But I think that the social history aspects have really provided historians of recent years with much more sort of ground to go over. And I think that type of thing has been very well done in the episodes of Foyle's as well.
You know, it's curious. We've done now, I think, something like 19 films of Foyle's War, and I was beginning to think, actually, that we had covered just about every subject there was to cover. Certainly in terms of the broad canvas, you know, from fascism to anti-Semitism and, you know, all the different stories, and espionage, the SA, you know, the secret services. We've really gone in every single direction, and I don't think there was that much more. But the funny thing about Foyle's War was I used to say that every year. I'd say, goodness, there isn't another story to tell now, and then I'd open another book and I'd find one, so I'm sure we could have done more.